Star blessings. Let's talk about the full moon in Sagittarius coming up in about a week's time. I thought I'd get in a little bit earlier than usual because I had the time today. So I was looking at the Sabian symbol for this full moon. And I often look at the Sabian symbols both for lots of things actually, but new moon, full moon, etc. So I'll start by just reading the keynote and the name to this phase, because it's a phase basically, right? So if you're not aware of this book, it's called this, well, it's one of the Sabian symbol books. It's the one that I use by Dane Rudhyar, and it's every single degree of the zodiac, that is the 360-degree circle, has a particular image, if you like, a particular archetypal message, psychic message, and so forth. And sometimes you'll find when you read the degree of the symbol to whatever you are looking at, it will just give you at times an incredible and valuable insight into the energy of the planet, the new moon, the full moon, whatever it is you're looking at. You can use this to look at the degrees of your ascendant, the degrees of your own planets, and so forth. It can be used in lots of different ways. So the symbol for the full moon, we're going to take the 14th degree of Sagittarius, because the full moon is on the 13th degree. So the way this works is you always take the subsequent degree. This is called the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx. That's just the name of the name that's been given to the 14th degree of Sagittarius, which is pretty powerful. Think about the Great Pyramids in Egypt and the Sphinx, you know, the archetype of the Sphinx. There's so much inherent wisdom contained, you know, historically within the history of the Egyptian teachings and cultures and so forth. So we can see straight off the bat there's something very sacred, philosophical, insightful, psychic, you could say, about this energy. And it makes sense because, well, Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter, which is the planet of wisdom. And Sagittarius and Jupiter really are the archetypes that help us bring meaning, find meaning in whatever it is we are exploring, you know, embodying, cultivating, learning, experiencing. Think about it in very simple terms. If you're going through something and there's no meaning to it, when we don't see meaning in anything that's going on in our life, that's what leaves us, I think, feeling a sense of emptiness or a sense of hopelessness or a sense of anger or whatever it may be. Because when there's no meaning to something, it lacks meaning, right? So meaning is important, and it is Sagittarius and Jupiter that brings meaning to our life, right? So the keynote is the enduring power of occult knowledge and of its quasi-divine custodians, seedmen of a previous cycle of existence. So you can interpret that in whichever way you wish, really, but I feel that keynote, the meaning in that is the enduring power of occult knowledge. So there's a seed in this frequency of the 14th degree of Sagittarius that holds tremendous wisdom, and that's a really lovely and hopeful energy to step into when we're thinking about this full moon in Sagittarius. So I just wanted to start with the Sabian symbol. We can keep that as a side note as we explore the chart together for the full moon. And also, I guess, just it's always great to go back to basics when you're looking at a full moon. First of all, where is this full moon in your birth chart? That's going to be, you know, personalized for you. You know, do you have planets in that Sagittarius house? What's the Sagittarius house feel like? and look like for you? How does Sagittarius speak to you? How do you resonate with that frequency? It's always really great to contemplate on those aspects, right? The archetypal aspects of whatever you are looking at. In this case, we're looking at the full moon. So some keywords for Sagittarius: the teacher, natural law, the shaman, priesthood, missionary, the explorer, inspiration, faith, wisdom, truth-seeking, intuition, honesty, long journeys, pilgrimage, foreigners, immigrants. It connects to a lot of different things: expansion, meaning, wisdom, beliefs, adaptability. It has a dogmatic component to its frequency as well. So those are just some key words to consider when you're thinking about the archetype of Sagittarius. But if you just narrowed it down and thought to yourself, well, okay, Sagittarius is what brings meaning to my life. And it is also the archetype and its ruler, Jupiter. Those are the archetypes that help me have a sense of trust and hope and faith, right? Deep faith and deep trust. And really employing and inviting your own intuition, right? I think that's an important thing to cultivate on a daily basis, because your intuition is always there, right? But for a lot of the time, we don't listen to it. Now, I know in my own life, every time I haven't listened to my own intuition, it's been the wrong thing. Like, my intuition is never, ever wrong. And I think that is the case for all of us. It's just really about nurturing the component of you that is extremely intuitive. And Sagittarius really opens that up, because Sagittarius is right brain, Gemini is left brain. So right brain energy here with the Sagittarius full moon. Okay, so let me just, the light's going to start interfering here, but I'll deal with that in a minute. Let's just bring up the full moon chart. So this is for Melbourne, Australia, and therefore never mind the house placements of everything, because it will differ based on your own location, obviously. Let me just expand that screen a little bit. Okay, so there it is there, the full moon. It's always a sun moon opposition. Obviously, that's a full moon. So there we see it in the third and ninth axis in this particular chart. But as I said, never mind the house placements. It'll be different for you based on your location. The first thing that I will talk about a few different things in this transmission relative to other planets. But the first thing that I want us to focus on is Saturn, right, in Pisces, because Saturn is actually square this full moon. Now, depending on your rules around orbs and so forth, some people will say, no, that's not close enough. That's fine, each to their own. In my opinion, this full moon is square Saturn. And if indeed this is the case, which I believe it is, then it brings in a very interesting element to this full moon. It's Saturn, which is a difficult energy. It's a square aspect, which again is a difficult aspect. And it's sort of wedging itself, if you like, right in between, the sun and the moon, right? Now, the full moon is always a continuation of a cycle that began at the new moon, right? So the new moon was in Taurus and it was conjunct Uranus. And so 2 weeks later, we have the full moon in Sagittarius. I feel that this full moon, because it's squaring Saturn especially, is my mouse. Sorry, the glare of the sun is just messing around with my vision. Why am I not getting... Okay, sorry, my mouse was just playing up. I couldn't see it. First of all, I guess in the bigger context, some things to consider, and I'll get back to the Saturn in a minute, because this is all part of it. we're approaching the middle of the year, right? So we're coming up to a pretty significant time in terms of being at the midpoint of this 12 months, right? And what's going to happen is, well, Pluto is going to go back into Capricorn. So whilst there's some portals that are propelling us forward and inviting us into creating new foundations, there's still a lot of clearing and a lot of finishing things off. I mean, we're still, you know, really at the end of the eclipses. Those eclipses were extremely powerful. And again, there's debate on the matter of how long is the energy of the eclipses open. And some people say 6 months, some people say 3 months. Those energies are still kind of present. So Pluto's going to go back into Capricorn very soon, in the month of June, and it will track back to 27 degrees of Capricorn, and it won't get back into Aquarius until January of 2024. So there's something really, you know, profound and important that's obviously going to be completed as you can see, Pluto is retrograde and basically tracking back to eventually getting into Capricorn, which, as I said, happens in June. So that's kind of in the mix here. There's something that we still haven't completed. Obviously, that speaks to huge collective things, and then it could speak to very personal, individual things in our life as well, depending on where Pluto is transiting in our chart. So that's in the mix. Saturn being in Pisces, which is, you know, a 2.5-year journey, and it's at the, you know, very early stages of that. Saturn will go retrograde in the month of June as well, at this degree, actually. And Saturn in Pisces is very much a cycle of endings. A lot of things finishing, ending, dissolving, clearing. And it can be a very confusing sort of state of affairs relative to the perception that we have about reality, because Saturn corresponds to this conscious construct of reality that we perceive. And Saturn in Pisces is the weirdest energy. They couldn't be more opposite to each other, really, but they can work very well together as well. In any case, there's something really powerful finishing with Saturn in Pisces. And because it's squaring this full moon, we can tap into our intuition, just as the Sabian symbol said. There's so much depth and wisdom, you know, it's sage type of energy, the sages, you know, the sage within you, right? The guru within you, as it were, the truth seeker that you are. So whilst there's a really optimistic component to the full moon in Sagittarius, because Sag is happy-go-lucky, that's the energy of Sag. And I think there's something powerful illuminating here for us with the full moon in Sagittarius. But the illumination, I think, is going to be connected strongly to this Saturn energy. And that is, what are we actually, what timelines are we finishing? What journeys in our lives are we finishing and ending and allowing to naturally come to a close? Because the natural inclination from our human perspective is to hang on, right, to things, people, whatever it is. It's always a really hard passage in life when we have to allow something to come to an end. So I think the Saturn squaring this full moon is kind of bringing in the hard reality, if you like, of certain elements of our life that are actually coming to full circle, right? Saturn in Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac. And the full moon in Sagittarius can really heighten and illuminate, from an intuitive perspective, the ability to grasp what Saturn in Pisces is bringing to culmination or clearing or ending for you. And the ability to trust your intuition about that, right? Because as I said, you know, Saturn in Pisces can be very tricky around our perception of what's real and what isn't. There's so much of that going on with this craziness of the AI stuff, right? That's, you know, just really infiltrating this reality at the moment. But just from our own personal perspective and journey, this is an invitation. It's, I mean, let's remember it's a full moon, right? We have a full moon every month, right? So it's only there for a couple of days. It generally doesn't change our lives, but the full moon it can be a timer and an activation of things that are already set in motion that are going on in our life, right? Relative to everything else happening to or with our chart, if you like, from an astronomical perspective. And, you know, just relative to where we're at in life at the moment, with our work, with our love life, with our friendships, with our learning, with studying, with whatever it is, right? Sagittarius always invokes the desire to seek more truth, right? The desire to seek meaning and the greater sort of connection and understanding of what's called natural law, particularly in evolutionary astrology, right? So Saturn here is, as I said, wedged in. It's pretty much saying if there's a sense of conflict or tension that arises within you, the conflict or tension will be around what's kind of dismantling itself, if you like, out of your reality at the moment, Saturn in Pisces. And the gift that's offered here, because the full moon is in a Jupiter-ruled sign, and Jupiter is the greater benefic, it's a benevolent archetype, it inherently brings no harm. So moon in Sag is a wonderful energy, and just on a very superficial, basic level, it can just be having a full moon where you're just feeling a lot more uplifted, you know, a lot more optimistic about whatever it is that's going on in your life. It could just be a couple of days where you're feeling really happy, you know, just put it very simply. But at a more deeper level, for those of us that, you know, are really sort of working with the integration of our chart, you know, with the integration of the script, because we all have our own unique script. And if we can become aware of the script and find a way to continuously remain aligned with it, the more authentic our path will be, and the less resistance there will be to the soul's intentions and desires. So full moon in Sag, the possibility of being able to intuit and have a greater sense of faith and trust into what's leaving your life, Saturn in Pisces, and the upcoming preparations of new cycles that are beginning, right? And, you know, again, at the bigger picture level, we are still finishing a lot of things from a soul level, because Pluto is going to go back into Capricorn. That's a really big deal, the fact that Pluto goes back into Capricorn. So we are at the tail end of that Pluto and Capricorn journey, and we've had a very powerful glimpse already about Pluto's presence in Aquarius. It stirred up a lot of shit on the earth plane, a lot, with groups, communities, groups that identify in this way, groups that identify in that way, so on and so forth. You all know what I'm talking about, don't really need to be more specific. And then there's the whole technological AI component of things, which is you know, really just doing things that we never thought possible, of course. And as I said in a video just the other day, when I talked about Jupiter, Pluto and Mars being in a T-square, which is really active in this full moon as well, you know, and just everything that's sort of escalating from the point of view of Mars-Pluto will forces being at odds with each other, if you like, right, relative to certain communities or individuals, so in our own personal lives and so forth. It's about recognizing Mars in Leo, the true power from our heart center, right? Leo is the heart chakra, but finding a way to integrate to the human family, right? The collective human family, Pluto and Aquarius, and the people having a voice, right? So that was kind of some of the themes that I addressed in a video just before this one. So if you haven't seen that, go back and listen to that if you wish, if you want to hear more about that. But it is still in play here, really, you know, with this full moon. So, you know, Sagittarius is, it is on at its most optimum level of expression. It is the archetype that brings us out of the, you could say, the depths and dark cave of Scorpio, which can be brutal sometimes, right? Because that's where we've got to face death, as it were. What sort of death are we facing? We're facing aspects of our own self that are dying, and therefore aspects of ourself that are being reborn. And to go through the dark night of the soul, or to go into these dark caves of Scorpio energy, we cannot go in them and through them and come out the other end without the experience of having transformed something. And that transformational process is typically extremely intense, often very painful, often very difficult. But when we can come out the other end of it with a sense of having shed some layers off, if you like, there's tremendous potential for new life in whatever it is we are stepping towards. And Sagittarius is the next sign, right? So Sagittarius is the bright blue sky. Scorpio is the dark alleys, the dark cave, the underworld. So Sagittarius brings up that that energy within us that has a greater sense of hope and optimism about the future, you could say, right? And although this is just a full moon, it still encapsulates those sorts of energies. But like I said, I feel that this Saturn squaring this full moon is going to be, you know, a little bit tricky for some people, a little bit challenging, because, you know, the moon in Sag has a natural urge to want to expand, right? There's an emotional component to this container. The moon is like a container that holds a really optimistic, emotional sense of faith and confidence and optimism about whatever it's projecting that energy onto. And Saturn is going to be the reminder, because it's squaring this full moon. It's absolutely fine to tune into the energy of Sag and the intuition and the wisdom and the insight that can be embodied at this time of this full moon, but not without recognizing what is actually completing as well and finishing from our life, because Saturn in Pisces is very much about that. You can also see here that there's a Uranus Mercury conjunction, and that's going to be exact literally the following day. So this energy is also active in this full moon chart, and Uranus and Mercury are both planets connecting to the mind. Uranus corresponds to long-term memory from an evolutionary perspective, the long-term memory body, and Mercury is our linear left brain, the part of our mind that just thinks about today, tomorrow, yesterday, what am I going to do in an hour's time, etc. But Uranus has that long-term memory. And because they are two planets of the mind and they are coming together in a conjunction, there can be really powerful insights that can occur here. Think about it. Those two planets are actually the planets that correspond to astrology, by the way. Traditionally, it was said that Hermes, Mercury, was the ruling planet of astrology. And when Uranus was discovered back in I think it was the 1800s or 17, I've just forgotten. But anyway, whenever Uranus was discovered, it was associated to being the planet that corresponds to ruling astrology. So, I mean, if you have, for example, transiting Uranus coming to your Mercury in your chart, that is without a doubt, hands down, the most amazing time to actually study astrology, but to study anything for that matter, but certainly something that is more alternate, right? Uranus, astrology. So this aspect here is only there for a couple of days, but you can definitely get some really powerful flashes of insight and deeper understanding, you know, with whatever you are actually studying and learning at this time. Further to that, they conjunct on the 20th degree, and then it's interesting because in April next year, what happens is Uranus and Jupiter will form a conjunction in Taurus on the 21st degree. So I feel this Mercury-Uranus is quite profound because it's close enough to the degree that Uranus and Jupiter will be in. And Uranus and Jupiter is, without a doubt, hands down, the signature that speaks to sudden breakthroughs, just sudden opportunities and breakthroughs that come through exactly when you need them, when you thought, you know, all was lost, all hope was lost, you just couldn't get it together, couldn't get it working, you couldn't do this or you couldn't do that, there was road blockages, resistances, you know, whatever it is. Uranus, Jupiter breaks that open and just brings in sudden breakthrough. It's a really beautiful energy, really powerful. That's coming up in April. I'm really looking forward to that. It's all happening in the sign of Taurus, so we've got to bring that into the equation here and understand that it's got to do with the foundations we are building. So the thought process with Uranus, Mercury here is very much about our mind and the thoughts that we are planting, if you like, the foundations that we are planting through our mind, through our thinking. But Uranus gets us to think beyond the narrow perspectives that we might have, the conditioned mindsets that we might have. So Uranus conjunct Mercury breaks those conditioned narratives that we may have in our mind and our own personal limited perceptions of ourselves, of life, of whatever it is. So it's a really beautiful energy to inspire a more free oriented sort of perspective, if you like. Uranus is the planet of freedom. Jupiter is also a planet of freedom, and they will conjunct next year in April, which will be incredible. But just think about this Mercury-Uranus conjunction, which is active during this full moon as well. If the full moon is bringing in intuition, which it is because it's in the sign of Sagittarius, and think about the Sabian symbol that I read connects to the Sphinx and to the Great Pyramids, how much wisdom is contained in the ether of that part of the world there, thousands of years of wisdom, right? So there's tremendous potential for wisdom coming through this full moon. And as I said, because Saturn is squaring it, we have to contend with Saturn being there. Saturn is asking us to pay attention to the timelines or the narratives or the journeys or whatever it is, things that we've built in our life that are coming to a close, right? Because we're preparing for a brand new cycle of literally how we're going to experience this 3D reality, Saturn moving into Aries, right? So we're kind of working towards that at the moment, towards just allowing things to dissolve naturally as they need to, naturally and organically, right? So Saturn being square this full moon is saying you need to contend with that. You need to be aware of what it is that is dissolving and leaving your life, and trust your intuition with it. And what else have we got? I noticed that Juno is here as well, and I would place a lot of importance here on Juno because I did speak about Juno's ingress into Gemini, I don't know, about 2 weeks ago, I think it was, and I spoke about the themes that Juno in Gemini brings up. And because I have Juno in Gemini natally, I can speak about it from a deeply personal experience, which I touched on just from the point of view of understanding what Juno in Gemini feels like and how that archetype speaks in my life. So I spoke a lot about it, but now that she's close enough to this full moon, I feel the matters that Juno has been raising over the last few weeks, being in Gemini, which is all matters of the communication in our relationships. Now that can be friendships, that can be our lovers, that can be family. It can be anybody we have a relationship with, right? Because Juno is the archetype of relationships. And further to that, she's the archetype that speaks to when relationships feel like they're out of balance and there's no equality there in the input and output of what's happening within a particular relationship. Juno gets fired up. She gets really pissed off on matters when it comes to matters of equality and justice and fairness. And whilst they are those words, they're big words because they correspond to really big issues and matters in the world, right, collectively. But just bring it right back to yourself, right, and your relationships, and where there is a sense of inequality going on and where there is a sense of needing to clear things up and make things feel more equal in your relationships. Well, Juno in Gemini is bringing up the desire to need to communicate those things now. So given that that's been going on for a few weeks with Juno, and here she is with the full moon, if there has been, because it's not necessarily going to point to every relationship you have, that there is, a problem with every relationship, or this matter of things not feeling quite fair and balanced and so forth. It's not going to be the case with every relationship. It might just be one person where this has been activated in your life. So it's come to light. You're able to kind of see that more clearly, and you're able to now communicate about it. In fact, you feel like you have to say something about it, right? So if that has been the case for any of you, then this full moon is only going to bring more light to that particular relationship, to those particular issues with a particular individual, for instance. So that's what Juno's presence here is showing. I also noticed that Pallas, Athena, and Mars are conjunct, and Mars will approach Athena. That probably be in a few days' time. But in any case, it's still present here in this full moon chart. And I feel that because of when we're looking at the archetypes, the portals, the energies of any planet or any planets, they have their inherent meaning or significators, right? But then the next level is to make sense of it relative to the context of our life at any given moment, right? Because when you're 10 years old and when you're 40 years old, life is very different, and there are different matters and circumstances and journeys going on, right? You're not going to read Mars in Leo in the same way as you would from when you're 10 to when you're 40, for instance, right? So, and on a collective perspective, again, we need to apply these energies to what's appearing in this external 3D reality, what's appearing in the narratives that we are either hooked into or either just observing, right? So the most obvious thing to me, because Pallas Athena, of course, she's a protector. She's a very powerful goddess when it comes to law and protection. She's a warrior goddess, and she seeks for justice. She seeks to make things right. And what is she in? She's in Leo, the archetype of children. And Mars is in Leo as well. And Mars is what we fight for, what we want to defend. Now, in Cancer, it had that same quality about it of the desire to want to protect one's family, if you like. And there's been, a lot of concern and a lot of emotional rage around the matters of the protection of children, as per certain narratives playing out that wish to involve children in things that a lot of people are of the view are just totally inappropriate. And whilst there may be members in those communities that there'll be some that agree with that, there'll be some that don't, and then members outside of those communities. And I'm speaking to, you know, LGBT, you know, transgender and so forth, and not specifically those communities or the individuals that identify with those communities and so forth, but more to the matters of, you know, having stories read to children by drag queens, which is, that within itself is, there's nothing wrong with that. It's the content that's being shared that could be a problem. Now, I'm not saying that every approach about that and storyline about that is explicit in sexual themes and so forth, because in some cases it may not be, but from what I've seen, for the most part, it seems to be. You know, it seems to point to and speak to sexual content that is inappropriate for children. So as you all are aware, there's a lot of concern and commotion and anger, and there's a lot of blame and fault finding and a lot of projection and a lot of things being twisted and taken out of context. And so it's always important to keep an open mind, but the issue still remains. There are some things that children do not need to be subjected to or exposed to. They're just not, they haven't reached a stage of development where that particular information would actually be useful in their little minds, in their little brains, in their little hearts, in their little souls. So I feel this Pallas, Athena, Mars is really going to raise the bar with all those issues in a way where it's going to cause maybe new laws to come in, maybe I'm thinking new laws, protection laws, protective laws, and there is incredible debate from a law perspective about these issues, even here in Australia. I generally don't follow politics at all. In fact, I can't stand politics, never could. But occasionally I observe, you know, a little bit here and there, and there's just a couple of politicians here in Australia that appear to be very ethical and really interested in human rights and the rights of children, and, you know, fought tooth and nail regarding all the jabs that were more or less coerced, forced, you know, the last 3 years, the narrative around that, all that nonsense, which some people still believe, which I can't fucking believe that some people still believe it. But anyway, but those guys, they're now actually in Parliament fighting about the rights of children, and just matters like that are coming up quite prominent in the collective with just these trends and themes that are coming up, you know, as the world shifts and evolves. I'm just trying to find the deeper purpose of this issue that's coming up in our societies at the moment relative to the transgender community, or not even really relative to the transgender community. I don't have a problem with any community for that matter. Doesn't matter how they identify. But I do feel strongly about protection of people who are vulnerable, certainly children, and just the protection of women as well. You know, I feel I feel that's an important issue. Okay, so yeah, well, anyway, that Mars, Pallas, Athena, I think is going to raise the bar a bit with those kinds of narratives that are going on. Okay, let me just have a quick look at my notes. I guess the other matter here with this chart, let me just clear these lines. Where are we? So full moon ruled by Jupiter, squared by Saturn. Now, Jupiter is forming a sextile to Saturn here as well. And that's within range. So that helps that Saturn quite a bit, or that sextile aspect helps his full moon quite a bit, you could say. Saturn is in Jupiter's sign. So sextiles always speak to opportunities. And even though Saturn is the hard work, sometimes it can be the resistance to the hard work. Sometimes Saturn is just the greatest teacher. I've learned that as I've gotten a bit older. I never would have, I might have said that 20 years ago, but I never, 20 years ago, wouldn't have really felt that in my life, right? So, but Saturn in ancient medieval astrology is, he's the magician, actually. So we tend to experience Saturn more in this 3D reality as a cold, hard energy, because it is. Saturn corresponds to what's cold and wet. Pardon me, cold and dry, cold and dry. That's important, cold and dry. For example, if you've got a really cold day outside, say it's like peak winter, and it's freezing, you go outside, and it's like that here for me today, actually. You go outside and there's just this cold wind, it just goes to the bone, so to speak. That's Saturn, pure Saturn energy. Nothing else but Saturn. So that's why Saturn has the malefic qualities to it, if you like. And it's known as the greater malefic out of the two, out of Saturn and Mars, right? But it is one of the most powerful teachers. So here with the sextile to Jupiter, Jupiter being the ruler of the full moon, Jupiter does pretty well in Taurus, forming a sextile to a difficult planet. It's going to help this full moon energy. It's going to help what we are trying to, the possibility and potential of a more hopeful perspective of life moving forward, contending with the cycles that are coming to a close and an end, with the hope of Jupiter injecting possible potential opportunities to come up down the track, because this sextile is going to be in play for a little while. So this is not just about the full moon, but the fact that it is in play during the full moon is very, very helpful. Sextile aspects are very powerful. Don't underestimate them. They literally bring gifts and opportunities. And it is in Taurus, so Jupiter, that is. So it's got very much to do with the foundations that we are planting, the seeds we are planting, the structure from that Taurian level. So I really love that Jupiter has got a great aspect to Saturn here. Just going back to Uranus and Mercury, that's also a portal of energy that most certainly speaks to shocking information suddenly just popping up. So given the state of the world and everything that's going on, I think we can expect some really weird, unusual, shocking news coming through the collective. And it's got to have a connection to resources and money. Because even Mercury is connected to commerce and trade and things like that. So there'll be some unusual revelations that happen around those sorts of collective themes. You know, I just need to get some light reduced here. Blinded by the light. Yeah, I'm going to be very curious about what this unravels over those few days there around that full moon. And you know, full moons always illuminate and heighten things. So I expect some really weird news and information to come out. I just hope it's nothing terrible, you know, nothing terrible. A couple of a week or so ago, when I spoke about Algol being conjunct the sun, and I mentioned, you know, Algol, the fixed star, and I just talked about, you know, the essence of that star and some deeper sort of perspectives on that particular archetype or fixed star, because it's often referred to, you know, as the demon star, and it has such a dark and negative reputation. But I invited everybody to understand it from another level relative to the dark feminine that is suppressed and projected and so forth. And I just want to say that I mentioned in that video that I wouldn't be surprised if something, you know, something really terrible happens somewhere on that collective level on the day that the sun in Taurus was conjunct Algol. And I just wanted to mention that it did. It happened here in the city that I live in. It was just a tragic accident. It was an accident. It wasn't intentional or anything like that, but it was on the day that the sun was conjunct Algol. And Algol, when it does manifest in that way of bringing about tragedy, because it does bring that as well, it basically created a situation here in Melbourne, if you like. Not created, but as a result of that combination of energy in the ether here in Melbourne on that day, a school bus crashed with a truck, and there were, I don't know how many children were in that school bus, but basically all of them had severe critical injuries. Most of them had to have limbs amputated. A lot of them had head and spinal injuries. So the lives of those children and the lives of the parents and families of those children are forever changed now because of that tragic event. And that truck driver, nothing happened to him, by the way. I'm not saying anything should have happened to him. I'm just pointing out that nothing happened to him. And it was an accident. It was the glare of the sun in his eyes, believe it or not. That's all it takes. And look at the amount of lives were ruined, really. Imagine if your child was in an accident and you find out that your child is in hospital and his legs now have to be removed, God forbid, you know. It's tragic. There's no other word for it. So there was the Algol energy that day. And I'm sure there's other things that have gone on in the world. I can't keep track of every single country or every single event. I'd just be drained if I did. And I've, since Pluto's coming to my ascendant, I've been working through just eliminating a lot of things out of my life, people, groups I'm connected with, whatever, you know. Just gotten to that point where, yeah, it's just time to pull that energy back a bit. I wonder how many of you relate to that. How many of you have Pluto coming to your ascendant or on your ascendant now? Which means you've had Pluto in your 12th house, and that's the most difficult position for Pluto. And I did do a webinar on that a couple of months ago. So if you're interested in that webinar, email me and let me know. Just one final thing that I will add to this full moon picture, which may not sound pleasant initially, but just hear me out. So conjunct the sun and therefore opposite the moon, which you cannot see it here, is an asteroid called Nemesis. Nemesis is one of those archetypes that has developed a pretty shitty reputation as time has gone on. And when we hear the word nemesis, it is often associated to revenge and things of those nature, right? But Nemesis originally, the meaning of that goddess and that archetype and what she represented, she basically, I'm just going to read something here. Nemesis was the goddess of due enactment, a karmic equalizer who ensured that no one had too much good fortune but paid appropriately for their misdeeds. Known as the restorer of cosmic order, Nemesis was particularly focused on punishing acts of hubris, which is defined pride or arrogance in one's place, gifts or fortune. So basically, she was the goddess that kind of looked around and said, where I can see the imbalances that are occurring here. These guys over here are so fucking greedy. So let me just, remind them that they can't have it all when these people have got hardly anything. That's just not right. Cosmically, it's just not right. So she would come in and she would try to correct them, right, as it were. So it's really about restoring a balance where the insatiable greed of so many and their lack of lack of empathy or care that others have hardly anything to eat, for instance. That's where Nemesis comes in and shuts that shit down, as it were. Now, it'd be great if she was operating every single day and shutting that shit down. The world would look very different, but life doesn't work like that. And the asteroids don't work like that either, because the energies on the Earth plane are a reflection of the human family consciousness. No planet causes anything, no asteroid causes anything, as it were. We are the ones that cause everything through our own consciousness choices. However, when energies, portals are activated and so forth, those archetypes are magnified for better or for worse. And that they're only going to be magnified and shine their torch, their light, as it were, onto the matters that are currently enacted in our own consciousness and here on the earth plane. So perhaps for some individuals, this nemesis just might kick their butts a little bit relative to greed. Yeah, so let's see if anything comes up in the news, if there's some big event with a politician or a banker or just something. Or just, it can be because, she connects to revengefulness and retribution and things like that. In more modern terms, she's been associated to those sorts of themes. Then, it can be a full moon, the sun conjunct Nemesis opposite the full moon. So for somebody out there, this might just be the timing of something that where Nemesis, just comes in and says, no, can't do that anymore. This is just so imbalanced. Or it can be a revengeful person coming in. It's a tricky energy in any case. At a bigger picture level, it is about cosmic order and restoring balance. But, when you bring it down to how this might impact a particular individual, that's another story. So I just wanted to point out that she's hanging around there with this full moon. Also, I guess just one other final thing, you know, the nodes are nearing their the end of their journey through Taurus and Scorpio. Not quite there yet, but certainly nearing, because they change into Libra and Taurus, Libra and Aries rather, in July, is it? July, 18th of July. That's not far away. So this South Node in Scorpio is really bringing us to the final kind of layers of our unconscious, unresolved, scorpionic themes in our life. Obsession, possession, secrets, manipulation, transformation, dying, rebirth, you know, all the scorpionic things, right? So we're finishing a lot of that off now, because we're literally at the tail end of that. And so even though this Sag moon wants to take us into this, you know, ever hopeful view of our life, right? We are contending with Saturn being wedged in between, South Node still in Scorpio. We're finishing a lot of things off still, in other words, and Pluto is going to go back into Capricorn. So, and you know, Saturn in Pisces, that's the ending of things big time. So I think we're still in a position where we are, we have a sense that the life we knew we'll never go back to, and I think we've had that sense for a while now. But there'll be more insights and more truths coming home, as it were, to our understanding and our consciousness. I think a lot actually for the rest of 2023, because the energies from the point of view of South Node finishing up in Scorpio, Pluto going back into Capricorn, these are energies that are not finished yet, but they're at the tail end. So we've got opportunity to clear, because when you clear something, you make space for something new to come in. The problem with clearing and making space is the Taurus-Scorpio axes, because the Taurus part just wants to hang on. The Scorpio part is trying to get rid of it. I was going to bring up a personal example, but I've changed my mind. So I'm now trying to think of just some hypothetical example. I guess, you know, at a very basic level, and you can now, when you hear this, just translate it to something more profound and meaningful, right? If you're living in an apartment house, whatever, and you've moved in and you've got all this furniture everywhere, right? And you just, it's, you know, you've got too much of it, right? This Taurus, too many things. And you just stay with it, right? Because you don't want to let it go, because you bought it and you loved it when you bought it, and you know it's beautiful and whatever, right? You're attached to it. That's Taurus attachment. And the space is kind of, it gets stuck, right? It gets stagnant. There's no room to move, literally. And then at some point, because something activates in your chart or whatever, and you look around and you suddenly want to have this clearing process in your home. So you start moving things around, and you start either giving some things away or throwing things out, right? That they just don't fit, physically do not fit properly. But it's not until you recognize that, right, and make that decision and take the action to remove those things out of your life. And when you do, then suddenly you have this incredible new space, new energy. You can feel it literally. And that example is something that we can apply to our lives on every single level. So Taurus, attachment, Scorpio, the release of those attachments. The more we can release and make room, the more we can actually create new possibilities, new potential, new energy, new portals, new connections, new relationships, new journeys. How can we have any of those things if we are so adamant about keeping the same things around us? We outgrow things. That's relationships, that's furniture, that's whatever. So, you know, we're sort of still in amongst those sorts of energies with the South Node in Scorpio. And I guess, you know, full moon, it's only there a couple of days. It's more about the context of everything else happening around it. All right, I think I'm going to go. Some things to get to. Okay, well, thanks for listening. And hopefully you had some good takeaways out of this, some things to ponder about. Wishing you all a happy full moon when it does show up, which is in about a week's time. See you guys soon for, I'm just busting to talk about Venus in Leo retrograde, which will be the morning star. So we're still actually in the evening star phase of Venus, which is the star point that occurred 22nd of October, 2022, right? So relative to Venus's movement, we are in the evening phase. And Venus is going to go into Leo just a couple of days after the full moon. And she's going to be in Leo until October. It's a long time. And the reason for that, of course, is because she's going retrograde in Leo. And that is the birth of the morning star, her morning star phase. And the morning star phase, which I'll come back and talk about that, right? The morning star phase, the Leo retrograde, the aspects to that, what does that mean, so on and so forth. I'm really excited to come back and talk about that very, very soon. So much love and many star blessings and Venus blessings, and see you soon.